with no further ado, we're going to get to this week's topic. We're going to talk about Alice Paul. So today is International Women's Day. Imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together, we can forge women's equality. Collectively, we can all break the bias, celebrate women's achievements, raise awareness against bias, take action for equality. So this is the International Women's Day site. They are active every year. Last year, we all signed up to be a part of the movement. Yep, we sure did. So hopefully everyone is still getting their emails. And I'm scrolling up to see this year's, every year they have a theme. And this theme is break the bias. Last year's theme was saying no. And I'm going to see if they have a video for this year's theme. I know that everything is kind of slow because of COVID, so they may not have had a chance to interview women. Yeah, I don't see that they had a video up, but to break the bias, they want everyone to upload a picture with the arms crossed. So it says, strike the IWD, break the bias pose with your arms crossed to show commitment to calling out bias, smashing stereotypes, breaking inequality, and rejecting discrimination. So we're all going to submit a picture with everyone's permission doing the break the bias pose for today. So does everyone see the young man with his arms crossed? Wonderful, everyone. And here's some more pictures of this year's theme, striking the break the bias pose. So what they're saying is bias. It's spelled B-I-A-S. I'll type it in the chat. But basically what they're saying is there should be no discrimination, no inequality for women, especially in the workplace. It's kind of a tricky word. I'll type it in the chat for you so you can see how it's spelled, and you can look it up more when you get home, okay?
Born to a prominent Quaker family in Mount Laurel, New Jersey in 1885, Alice grew up attending suffrage meetings with her mother, Tacey. After earning her master's degree in sociology from the University of Pennsylvania in 1907, she moved to England to continue her studies. She quickly connected with Britain's rowdy suffragist movement, joining street protests, committing acts of civil disobedience, and even getting arrested for demanding the right to vote. When she returned to America, Alice was determined to bring that energy home. Working with the National American Woman Suffrage Association, she organized a march in Washington, D.C. in 1913 that attracted thousands.
A quick pause, really quick. Hey, Archie, can you hear me?
Alice believed that lobbying Congress would be the most effective way to win the vote. So in 1916, she formed the National Women's Party with the goal of amending the Constitution. In January 1917, the party took on President Woodrow Wilson, announcing they would begin daily protests outside the White House. The peaceful protesters were met with constant harassment and frequent arrests, but the suffragettes kept showing up. By the fall, dozens of women were imprisoned. Alice, on a hunger strike, endured brutal force feedings. Others were beaten. Faced with a public outcry, federal authorities released the prisoners in late November, and in January 1918, President Wilson urged Congress to pass the suffrage amendment. By 1919, it had been approved by both the House and the Senate, and after state ratification on August 18, 1920, the 19th Amendment became law. Women had finally won the right to vote. Alice moved on to her next challenge, passage of the Equal Rights Amendment, which she wrote herself.
Men and women shall have equal rights throughout the United States and every place subject to its jurisdiction.
The ERA faced strong opposition, and some thought it might even undermine existing protections for women. After being introduced in 1923, it took nearly 50 years for the ERA to pass through Congress, but Alice refused to give up. Alice died in 1977 as the ERA was being voted on by the states, a battle that continues today. In 2020, Virginia became the 38th state to ratify the ERA, almost 100 years after Alice first proposed it. Alice Paul, a lifelong crusader for gender equality.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen again so we can look at some actual pictures of Alice Paul. All right, Michael, help me out. What is the title of this Wikipedia article?
Alice Stokes Paul.
Yes, Michael, will you read the first paragraph about Alice Paul for us?
January 11th, 1885. July 9th, 1977. Was American Quaker suffragist,
Good job.
suffragist, and women's rights activist, and one of the main leaders and strategists of the
Campaign.
campaign for the 19th and amendment to U.S. Constitution,
which prohibits
sex discrimination.
Good job, Michael.
And the right to vote. Paul
Initiated. Good job.
Initiated, and along with Lucy Burns and others, strategized events such as the woman suffrage procession.
Go,
and
Michael.
silent sentinels, which were the part of successful campaign that resulted in the amendments passage in 1920.
Way to go. Now let's give a huge round of applause for Michael. He knocked that out of the park. And here is a picture of Miss Paul. So let's see if we can find some more pictures of her. That one was black and white. Here's some images of her. So we have that first one that was in the article Michael read about. Here's another image of her. I'm going to scroll through a couple more pictures of Mrs. Paul, and then we're going to talk about the very important thing that she did. Oh, that's a good picture of her. For women to be able to vote. And although she didn't make it to the end of her crusade, because she died in 1977, she was very influential in helping women have the right to vote. One thing that she did to take a stand against women not having the right to vote was she went on a hunger strike. Yeah, I'm going to read this. Michael, you read the title and then I'll read the article for us.
Okay. Anatomy of hunger strike. Why is it done, and what does it do in to the human body?
Way to go, Michael. So the anatomy of a hunger strike, why it is done, and what does it body. So in March 2021, jailed Russian opposition leader, I'm not going to butcher his name, we'll just do his initials, AN, refused food for 27 days to protest what he called inadequate medical care and to demand that he was seen by his own doctor. If we scroll down, here's some other people that did hunger strikes. Now, Michael's going to help me out with this part. We're going to explain it one more time. Michael, can you read to me what is a hunger strike?
Hunger strike is a method of protest during which food is refused. It is mostly used by those who have no other foreign protest available. Usually price signers, such an action is often aimed at protesting pricing conditions, achieving a policy change, or bringing attention to a certain case or cause. By reducing food or fluids, or in the case of what's called a dry hunger strike, protesters are their lives in danger, risking permanent damage to their health and eventually death.
I'm going to share my screen for this last time. We're going to watch one more video while we have each other's company today.
Ordinary equality. She came to the cause of women's suffrage when she saw Christabel Pankhurst heckled and forced off stage during a speech for women's right to vote. The Pankhursts' motto, "Deeds, not words," meant everything from speaking on street corners to participating in suffrage parades to throwing rocks and ultimately even to being arrested. The deeds were extreme, but ensured that the suffrage message was heard. Alice was sent to English prisons 3 times for her participation in the movement. While in prison, she went on hunger strike and had to endure painful forced feedings.
They usually tied me down by a sheet around the abdomen, by another around the lungs. One of the doctors stood behind and pulled my head back till it was parallel with the ground. He held it in this position by means of a towel drawn tightly around the throat. The other doctor put the tube down through the nostril. Then they poured the milk and liquid food into a funnel at the top of the tube. While the tube is going through the nasal passage, it is exceedingly painful.
Alice sailed home in January 1910. She introduced to the Pennsylvania suffrage movement bold new demonstration tactics, all from the Pankhurst playbook. Alice proved herself an innovative organizer and tactician in 1913 when she became chair of the Congressional Committee, a branch of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NAWSA. She traveled to Washington, D.C. to work for an amendment to the Constitution to give women the vote. Her counterpart in this work was Lucy Burns, a feisty young American lawyer whom she met in an English police station. In less than 3 months, the two organized a procession of over 8,000 men and women to march in Washington, D.C. in support of the women's vote. The procession attracted a huge crowd. As the marchers turned onto Pennsylvania Avenue, onlookers crowded the streets, preventing the parade from advancing. Hecklers tore at the marchers' banners and shouted at them to go home. Police did little to control the mounting chaos. The next morning, the parade and the riot, and more importantly, women's suffrage, were front-page news across the country. After several differences of opinion on tactics and strategy, Alice Paul and Lucy Burns left NAWSA and launched the National Woman's Party, or NWP. In 1916, President Wilson urged suffragists to stop their work in order to support America's war efforts in Europe. While many other women's organizations complied, Alice Paul refused, on the grounds that it was now more important than ever to have democracy at home before committing American lives to fight for democracy abroad. In January of 1917, the NWP launched a very bold new campaign to picket the White House. The Silent Sentinels, or Iron-Jawed Angels as one disgruntled senator called them, stood at the gates of the White House until November 1917, 6 days a week, 8 hours a day. In June, a group of young soldiers attacked the women for what they believed was unpatriotic behavior. Nearby police rushed in and arrested the women on the charge of obstructing traffic. Every day over the next several weeks, groups of picketers were arrested and sent to workhouses, jails, and mental asylums, all on the charge of obstructing traffic. Altogether, 168 suffragists went to jail between June and November of 1917. Imprisoned, the suffragists were fed rotten food, slept on hard stone floors, and endured filthy conditions. Alice joined the imprisoned suffragists in October, and soon after, she and the other women began a hunger strike. If any of the women died, it would lead to a political nightmare for the Wilson administration. Prison authorities initiated painful forced feedings 3 times a day. On the evening of November 14, 1917, a date suffragists called the Night of Terror, prison guards subjected incoming prisoners to violent beatings. News of the forced feedings and violence inflicted on the suffragists leaked out to newspapers and pressured the president to unconditionally release them. In January of 1918, President Wilson publicly announced his support of women's suffrage, and the House of Representatives immediately endorsed the women's suffrage amendment. It took several more months of open-air meetings, demonstrations, and forceful lobbying by the NWP to convince the Senate to pass the amendment. The 19th Amendment became law on August 26, 1920.
I never doubted that equal rights was the right direction. Most reforms, most problems are complicated, but to me, there is nothing complicated about ordinary equality.